family. Pastor Vandiver here. Glad to have you with us for another night of our virtual Bible study here at the Thankful Missionary Baptist Church in the big city of Blythe, Georgia. Tonight we're going to continue our character study, and we're going to be talking about the prophet Samuel, particularly his birth, which means we'll spend more time talking about his mother, his father, and the family dynamic in that household that leads up to his birth. So I'm excited tonight. I hope you are too. We're going to dive right in right after a word of prayer, and we're going to see what the Lord has for us on tonight. Let's pray. Father, we thank you and we praise you, Lord, for this day and for this opportunity, Lord, to reason together in your word. Give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and hearts to understand what your Spirit is saying to us on tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, family, my Bible is open to 1 Samuel, beginning at chapter 1, and we'll begin reading at verse 1. And we're going to go through this entire chapter tonight in broad strokes. We won't spend a lot of time diving deep into specifics. We want to hit the high points of this character study and make some applications as a result of our reading on tonight. So we're going to open up with verse number 1. There was a certain man from Ramathaim, Zuphite, from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. Here's where we dive into our lesson for tonight. He had two wives. One was called Hannah and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Going to verse 9 now. Once they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery, and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then will I give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will be used on his head. And she kept on praying to the Lord. Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk, and said to her, How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine. Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. I'm going to pause right there and we'll finish up the chapter, but I really want to focus in on a few key points in this particular passage, because the thing that we open up with, quite frankly, in verse 2 is a problem. It's a problem. It reads, he, meaning Elkanah, had two wives. One was called Hannah, the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. And you may be tempted in our cultural context in 2020 to see the problem as Elkanah having two wives. And while in our current context that's absolutely an issue, culturally in his day, that was not an issue. It wasn't a problem to have multiple wives in that particular cultural context. The issue here, the problem, is that there's this inequity where one of them has children and the other does not. And so we see that Peninnah was the one with children, but Hannah had none. As you might imagine, this is going to produce some major problems in this relationship, simply because in that cultural context, it was very important to the women of the day to have children. You might remember from Genesis when God pronounced the curse upon the serpent, and he told the serpent that the seed of the woman would crush his head, and he would bruise the heel of the wife's or of Eve's descendant. And I was talking about Jesus. It was a prediction of the coming Messiah. And so from that day forward, you might imagine that every woman who participated in the faith, who had a relationship and a knowledge of God, wanted to be a part of the story of the birth of the coming Messiah. And so if you were barren, as Hannah was, you were looked upon as cursed because there was no opportunity, no chance, no reality in which you could participate in the messianic reality or the messianic future of what would become the nation of Israel. And so she had no children, and with that came great shame. And so year after year they would go up to sacrifice. Year after year they would go to Shiloh for worship and sacrifice to God, and they would go to to Hophni and to Eli, these priests, and they would make their sacrifices and have their worship there. And a funny thing would happen, or an interesting thing would happen, is whenever that day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would actually give portions of the meat to both of his wives. And so Elkanah did as he was supposed to as a provider. He provided for both of his wives. He provided for his entire family. But there was a distinction that he made, because it shares in the text that he gave meat to his wife Peninnah and to all of her children. He was providing for them. But then it says that he gave to Hannah a double portion because he loved her and the Lord had closed her womb. In other words, what we see here is that there, in addition to the problem and in addition to what was going on in terms of having one wife who was barren and the other who could bear fruit, is that he had one that he preferred. Hannah was the preferred of the two. She was the preferred of the two wives, and we might remember through our study of the Bible that this is not an infrequent occurrence, is that there would be a preferred wife in the same way that Rachel was preferred to Leah back in earlier times. And so what we would see here is that Hannah was preferred, but her preference, or her being preferred by her husband, did not make her feel preferred by the Lord. Because the Lord had closed her womb, she would experience, even as the preferred wife, she would be one who experienced great pain. Why? Because she was always provoked by Peninnah. The Lord had closed her womb, and her rival rather kept provoking her in order to irritate her. And the text, it makes it very clear that she was successful. But before we really dive into that, I want to ask the question: have you ever, because of your pain, forgotten that you were preferred? It's really easy to do sometimes. We all recognize that we are children of God, and God does prefer his children. He has called us by his name. We are believers in Jesus Christ. He has granted us his Son. He has granted us his Spirit. But oftentimes our experience causes us to forget the preference that he has for us. I want to caution us against that, because not all of life is comfortable. Not all of life is always enjoyable. There are times in our lives and in our relationships and in our professional lives that we are challenged, and that things become difficult, and that things become uncomfortable for us. And if we're not careful, we'll forget whose child we are. We'll forget just how special we are in the eyes of God. And oftentimes our being special in the eyes of God is demonstrated through our being special in the eyes of others. In this case, she was special in the eyes of her husband, which was indicative of God's love and preference for her through her husband Elkanah. And so here we see that even though she's preferred, there's a real pain that persists in her life. She's picked on mercilessly by Peninnah, who could have children, who actually felt like she was perhaps the preferred one. But in the eyes of her husband, she was not preferred. It was Hannah who indeed was preferred. And when in those moments where we're not feeling so preferred, in those moments where we're feeling the pain of our reality, the pain of our circumstances, the pain of our present, it raises the question: what position do we take? Do we take a position of faith, or do we take a position of fear? Do we take a position of absolute trust in the Lord, or do we take a position of doubt? Because the position that we take has everything to do with the outcome that we experience when we find ourselves in that moment of pain, where we might forget that in fact we are preferred. What was Hannah's position. What position did she take? I believe she took a position of great faith. And that's my encouragement to us today, that even in those moments where we don't feel so preferred, when our pain overrides our preference, when we honestly forget just whose child we are, and we give in to the flesh, and we give in to doubt, and we give in to consternation and to pain and to fear, when we give in to those things that are not of the spirit but of the flesh, it helps us to be reminded that there is a singular position that we ought to take, and it's the one that Hannah herself took in this particular story. Let's read it. Verse 9 says, "Once, when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. And in her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly." A couple things are happening here. The first thing is she turned to the Lord. How often do we forget to turn to the Lord in those moments of discomfort, in those moments of doubt and despair? How often do we forget to trust in the Lord with all of our hearts and lean not to our own understanding, but in all of our ways to acknowledge Him so that He can direct our paths? The Lord directs Hannah's path to go and to pray. And in that prayer, weeping to the Lord bitterly. In other words, she poured her heart out to the Lord. She was truthful with God. It wasn't necessarily one of these eloquent prayers that we like to pray with the these and the thous and the thuses. It wasn't us trying to use a million words, trying to sound eloquent with the God who knows our heart. She just wept bitterly before the Lord, and she cried out to Him. And in her prayer, she made a vow, saying, "Lord Almighty, if you will only look unto your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." She made a promise to the Lord. And how many times have we made promises to the Lord? I know I have. Not something I necessarily recommend, because we don't always follow through on our promises to God, and yet and still many times He's gracious towards us in that He does not call us to account on that broken promise that we've made to Him. But here she does make this promise that if God would give her a son, she would return that son to God, and no razor would come upon his head. This would be a Nazirite vow. This is a vow to make him a Nazirite. Not only would no razor come upon his head, but as a Nazirite, or as a part of this Nazirite vow, he would be able to consume no alcohol and touch no unclean thing. In other words, it's the same Nazirite vow that we saw given unto Samson in the book of Judges, and so we'll cover that in later lessons about Samson and the Nazirite vow. But here in Samuel, she makes this Nazirite vow on behalf of her son, that he would not have a razor to touch his head, and he would be returned to serve the Lord all the days of his life. But then in verse 12 it says, even after she makes this vow, she keeps on praying. So her position was one not only of faith, but one of persistence. In other words, we have to be mindful that God doesn't always show up right when we want Him to. But I promise you, God always shows up on behalf of His children. He always shows up. You know how the song is written, you know the lyrics. He may not come when you want Him to, but He's always on time. She kept praying. It was a persistent prayer. She was persistent in her pursuit of God on behalf of her yet unborn son, the one that she did not know beyond a shadow of a doubt that she would have, but she trusted the Lord and she kept on praying. Funny thing happens, that when we are persistent in our prayer, when we're consistent in our pursuit of God, oftentimes He sends people our way to make manifest and to assist us on our journey of faith toward whatever plan God has for our lives. In this case, in her persistent prayer, God sent her a priest. His name was Eli, and he observed her mouth. She was praying, not aloud, but in her heart she was praying, but her lips were moving. And Eli saw this happening, and Eli thought that she was drunk, because that's a strange way to pray. Either you pray silently to yourself and your lips don't move, or you pray aloud audibly where your lips and your words are concentric or in tune with one another, but not one where you're praying silently and yet your lips are still moving. This was strange to him. Oftentimes when we're in passionate pursuit of God for our future, we do some things that we wouldn't ordinarily do. Have you ever gotten strange in your pursuit of God? Have you ever done something outside of the ordinary? Have you ever done something that people might consider abnormal in your pursuit of God toward whatever end He has for your life, whatever purpose He has in store for you? She prayed silently, but her lips were moving. And so he asked her, how long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine, he says. And she says, no, I'm not drunk. I'm a woman who's deeply troubled. You see, once again here, first to the Lord and then to Eli, she confesses her pain, because oftentimes we cannot be relieved of that which hurts us and that which haunts us because we keep it to ourselves and we don't share exactly what it is that's troubling us in that moment. She was honest with God, and she was honest with the man of God. She says, I've not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. So don't take your servant for a wicked woman, she says, because I've been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life where I've experienced great anguish and great grief, and things have just not gone my way. Even here recently, I've cried out to the Lord for healing. I've cried out to the Lord to make me well, and I continue to cry out, and I continue to trust God, and I continue to believe that He's able to do what no doctor can do. He's able to do what no medication can do. He's able to do exceeding abundantly above all I can ask or think. But it's only when we have that type of position of the power and the presence of God in our lives that we can see Him move to action on our behalf, or even send us someone on our journey to help to give us what we like to call confirmation of that which we believe, confirmation of that which we believe that God has said to us in our private times with Him. So she says, rather, don't consider me a wicked woman. I've been praying out of anguish. I've been praying out of my pain. I am hurt. I am grieving, and I am laying it bare before the Lord. And so I believe Eli, sensing her pain, sensing her anguish, but most of all, sensing her faith and her sincerity in her faith, he says, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of Him. This is a pretty powerful point in this particular message, because what it becomes is a pronouncement. He pronounces blessings upon her because of her faith, pronounces blessings upon her because of her sincerity, pronounces blessings upon her because he sensed her faith and sincerity, not being a drunk woman or a woman who was wicked, as Hannah said, but a woman who was faithful and who was demonstrating great faith in how she was comporting herself, and great faith in her position to seek the Lord in her anguish and not to seek after herself or after flesh. She came to the Lord, to the house of the Lord, to get what it was she was seeking God for. And so he makes this pronouncement. He says, may the Lord give you what it is you're asking for. And her response is very simple. May your servant find favor or preference now in your eyes. Because understand, the priest was the representative of God. And while she already had favor in the eyes of her husband, she was looking for favor in the eyes of God. She did not recognize that she already had God's favor. But now she gets confirmation of God's favor through Eli. You're favored. She sought favor and now has confirmation. May your servant find favor in your eyes. And then she went on her way and ate something. Don't miss the fact that she ate something. In her grief, in her pain, she wouldn't eat. In her pain, she cried and she wept. But now, after this pronouncement, now after demonstrating her faith, it says that she's settled now, or it shows rather that she's settled now in her spirit. And it says that she went on her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. As a result of giving it to God, as a result of taking it to the Lord in prayer, she left it at that altar. How many times do we come to the Lord in prayer and we leave with the same stuff we came with? We leave with the same issues that we came with. I remember a time several years ago, I was at a hotel. It was one of those nice hotels that my company was paying for, and it was really high end. And I carry my own bags. I typically would carry my bag, my suitcase, and all those different things. And I would would kind of just walk by the bellhop, and I wouldn't accept them taking the bags to the rooms. I got it. I'm good. Well, this was one of those hotels where they wouldn't take no for an answer. And so I got there, I checked in, and the bellhop said something very powerful to me. Well, actually, the receptionist said something very powerful to me. She said, "Take your bags and drop them off over there and then go on up." How often would we benefit greatly from that advice if we just leave our bags over there with God and go on up to where God is trying to take us? But so often we're like I was, I'll carry my own bags. Thank you very much. I'm strong enough to carry these bags. I'm powerful enough to carry these bags. I can carry these bags on my own. We have someone who's ready and willing and able to have us drop the bags off over there so that we can go up to whatever it is and wherever it is God's trying to take us. She left her bags over there. And when she got up, it says that she went away and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. She left it with the Lord. And so in leaving it with the Lord and in walking out now her faith, it says early the next morning they arose and they worshiped before the Lord, and her and her husband, they went back and they had relations, and that morning the Lord remembered her and her faith and her sincerity before the Lord. And so in the course of time, the Bible tells us that she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She became pregnant. This was the pregnancy phase of this particular story, and gave birth to a son. But this can't be the end of the story, because she named him Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him." You see, not only did the Lord remember her, but she didn't forget the Lord when the Lord gave her what it was she asked for. And family, how often are we guilty of forgetting the Lord when he gives us what we ask for? We ask him and we weep bitterly, and we go before the Lord in great and strong and powerful and emotional prayer. God, if you just bring me out of this. God, if you just give me this. God, if you just do that. And he does it for us, and then we forget him. And we go on our way just counting our blessings and talking about how blessed we are and how highly favored we are, and we forget the one who blessed us and the one who favored us in that circumstance. We stop praying, we stop reading our word, we stop fasting, we stop doing what we know to do to keep the blessings of God flowing in our lives. She didn't forget God. She named her son Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him." And so at this point, because she didn't forget the Lord, you have to know that she was not going to forget her promise to the Lord. When her husband Elkanah went up with all of his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vow, Hannah did not go. She stayed behind. She said to her husband, "After the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord." This was her promise to the Lord. She was going to fulfill that promise. And as a result, Samuel was going to be everything that God intended for him to be. And so the husband Elkanah, who favored his wife and who also understood the promise that she had made, said, "Do what seems best to you. Stay here until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord make good his word." And so the woman stayed home and nursed her son until he was weaned. And after he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull and an ephah of flour and skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. And when the bull had been sacrificed, she brought the boy to Eli, and she said, here's the presentation, "Pardon me, Lord, my Lord, as surely as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. And so now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." And he worshiped the Lord there. That's the presentation. That's Hannah fulfilling her promise to the Lord after the Lord fulfilled his promise to Hannah. And as we see, the birth of Samuel is so rich in pain, like we experience pain. It's so rich in problems, like we experience problems. It's so rich in God's presence, as we can experience God's presence, but it's also rich in position. Hannah was a woman of great faith. And that's my challenge to us as we close on tonight, is that whatever we're going through and struggling with, it may not necessarily be barrenness in the physical sense, but it may be barrenness in the spiritual sense. It may be barrenness in a financial sense. It may be barrenness in a relational sense. Please take great care that your position be one of faith, where you take it to the Lord and that you trust in Him with everything that's in you, that He alone can bring to pass that which you're seeking Him for. So seek the Lord that you might be fruitful in your relationship. Seek the Lord that you might be fruitful professionally. Seek the Lord that you might be fruitful spiritually, that you might bear much fruit for the Lord. Seek Him in all that you do. And then when God has blessed you with fruitfulness, don't forget to present yourself back to the Lord, and don't forget to present your blessings back to the Lord in great thankfulness and great gratefulness before the Lord, because you recognize who it is that did it for you, who it is that brought about that blessing in your life, who it is that allowed you to give birth to whatever powerful blessings that God has, whether financial, relational, spiritual. God allowed you to experience that great birth. Give back to God that which He has given to you. And the Lord can not only bless you, but bless the gifts that He's given you for all the days of your life. Have great faith. Be like Hannah. Take it to the Lord. Be like Hannah. Have a position of great faith. Be like Hannah. Don't get caught up in the ridicule of the world and those around you. Don't get caught up in a position of taking a position of pain and doubt and fear. Don't be a person who responds in the same bitterness that people treat you with. Take it to the Lord, because we all have paninas. We all have problems. We all have pain. Take it to the Lord in prayer and watch God bless you all the days of your life. We love you. We thank you. And we trust that you heard the word on tonight. Be a person of faith, a person of great faith, sincere faith, taking it to the Lord and trusting and believing that God will bring somebody your way who will confirm His plan for your life, who will walk with you and journey with you on God's plan for your life, but also give you that pronouncement and that encouragement that God is able to do exceeding abundantly above all you ask or think. We love you. We thank God for you. Have a great night. And thanks for tuning in tonight here at the Thankful Missionary Baptist Church's virtual Bible study in the big city of Blythe, Georgia. God bless you and good night.